Part 66 of the Chronicles of Crime, Volume 1, by Camden Pelham. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 66. Mary Bateman, commonly called the Yorkshire Witch, executed for murder. Part 3. A few anecdotes upon the subject of the belief in witchcraft in former days we trust will not prove uninteresting to our readers. The reign of James VI of Scotland and first of England may be said to have been the witchcraft age of Great Britain. Scotland had always been a sort of fairyland, but it remained for that sagacious prince, at a time when knowledge was beginning to dispel the mists of superstition, to contribute by his authority and writings to resolve the prejudice of education into an article of religious belief among the Scottish people. He wrote and published a treatise on demonology, the purpose of which was to resolve the doubting hearts of many as to the fearful abounding of those detestable slaves of the devil, witches or enchanters. The authority of Scripture was perverted to show not only the possibility but certainty that such detestable scenes do exist, and many most ridiculous stories of evil enchantment were added to establish their fearful abounding. The treatise, which is in the form of a dialogue, treats also the punishment which such crimes deserve, concluding that no sex, age, nor rank should be excused from the punishment of death, according to the law of God, the civil and imperial law, and the municipal law of all Christian nations. In answer to the question, "What to judge of death, I pray you?" the answer is, "It is commonly used by fire, but there is an indifferent thing to be used in every country, according to the law or custom thereof." Such in fact was the cruel and barbarous law of James's native country, and such became the law also of England when he succeeded to the sceptre of Elizabeth. Many hundreds of unfortunate creatures in both countries became its victims, suffering death ignominiously for an impossible offence. Neither sex nor age nor rank, as James had sternly enjoined, was spared, and it was the most helpless and inoffensive, such as aged and lone women, who were most exposed to its malignant operation. There were persons regularly employed in hunting out and bringing to punishment those unfortunate beings suspected of witchcraft. Matthew Hopkins resided at Manningtree in Essex, and was witch-finder for the associated counties of Essex, Suffolk, and Norfolk, and Huntingdonshire. In the years 1644, 1645, and 1646, accompanied by one John Stern, he brought many to the fatal tree as reputed witches. He hanged in 1 year no less than 60 reputed witches in his own county of Essex. The old, the ignorant, and the indigent, such as could neither plead their own cause nor hire an advocate, were the miserable victims of this wretch's credulity, spleen, and avarice. He pretended to be a great critic in special marks, which were only moles, scorbutic spots, or warts, that frequently grow large and pendulous in old age, but were absurdly supposed to be teats to suckle imps. His ultimate method of proof was by tying together the thumbs and toes of the suspected persons, about whose waist was fastened a cord, the ends of which were held on the banks of the river by 2 men, in whose power it was to strain or slacken it. Swimming upon his experiment was deemed a sufficient proof of guilt, for which King James, who is said to have recommended, if he did not invent it, assigned a ridiculous reason, that, as some persons had renounced their baptism by water, so the water refuses to receive them. Sometimes those who were accused of diabolical practices were tied neck and heels and tossed into a pond. If they floated or swam, they were consequently guilty, and were therefore taken out and burned; but if they were innocent, they were only drowned. The experiment of swimming was at length tried upon Hopkins himself in his own way, and he was upon the event condemned, and, as it seems, executed as a wizard. In a letter from Sergeant Widrington to Lord Whitelock, mention is made of another fellow of the same profession as Hopkins. This fellow received 20 shillings a head for every witch he discovered, and thereby obtained rewards amounting to £30. In an old print of this execrable character he is represented with two witches. One of them, named Holt, is supposed to say, "My imps are 1. Ilemosier, 2. Pyewacket, 3. Peck in the crown, 4. Greasel Greedygut, 4 animals attend, Jamara, a black dog, Sack and Sugar, a hare, News, a ferret, Vinegar Tom, a bull-headed greyhound." This print is in the Pepysian Library. Among a number of women, as many as 16, whom Hopkins in the year 1644 accused at Yarmouth, was one of whom the following account is given. It appears that she used to work for a Mr. Moulton, a stocking merchant and alderman of the town, and upon a certain day went to his house for work, but he being from home, his man refused to let her have any till his master returned, whereupon, being exasperated against the man, she applied herself to the maid, and desired some knitting work of her, and when she returned the like answer, she went home in great discontent against them both. That night, when she was in bed, she heard a knock at the door, and going to her window, she saw, it being moonlight, a tall black man there, and asked what he would have. He told her that she was discontented because she could not get work, and that he would put her into a way that she should never want anything. On this she let him in, and asked him what he had to say to her. He told her he must first see her hands, and taking out something like a penknife, he gave it a little scratch, so that a little blood followed, a scar being still visible when she told the story. Then he took some of the blood in a pen, and pulling a book out of his pocket, bid her write her name, and when she said she could not, he said he would guide her hand. When this was done, he bid her now ask what she would have, and when she desired first to be revenged on the man, he promised to give her an account of it next night, and so leaving her some money, went away. The next night he came to her again, and told her he could do nothing against the man, for he went constantly to church, and said his prayers morning and evening. Then she desired him to revenge her on the maid, and he again promised her an account thereof the next night. But he said the same of the maid, and that therefore he could not hurt her. But she said that there was a young child in the house which was more easy to be dealt with. Whereupon she desired him to do what he could against it. The next night he came again, and brought with him an image of wax, and told her they must go and bury that in the churchyard, and then the child, which he had put in great pain already, should waste away as that image wasted. Whereupon they went together and buried it, the child having laid in a languishing condition for about 18 months, and being very near death. The minister sent this woman with this account to the magistrates, who thereupon sent her to Mr. Moulton's, where, in the same room that the child lay, almost dead, she was examined concerning the particulars aforesaid, all of which she confessed, and had no sooner done, but the child, who was 3 years old, and was thought to be dead or dying, laughed and began to stir and raise up itself, and from that instant began to recover. The woman was convicted upon her own confession, and was executed accordingly. A more melancholy tale does not occur in the annals of necromancy than that of the Lancashire witches in 1612. The scene of the story is in Penderbury Forest, 4 or 5 miles from Manchester, remarkable for its picturesque and gloomy situation. It had long been of ill repute as a consecrated haunt of diabolical intercourse, when a country magistrate, Roger Nowell by name, took it into his head that he should perform a great public service by routing out a nest of witches, who had rendered the place of terror to all the neighbouring vulgar. The first persons he seized on were Elizabeth Demdike and Anne Chattox. The former was 80 years of age, and had for some years been blind, and principally subsisted by begging, though she had a miserable hovel on the spot, which she called her own. Anne Chattox was of the same age, and had for some time been threatened with the calamity of blindness. Demdike was held to be so hardened a witch that she had trained all her family to the mystery, namely Elizabeth Device, her daughter, and James and Alison Device, her great grandchildren. These, together with John Balcock and Jane his mother, Alice Natter, Catherine Hewitt, and Isabel Roby, were successively apprehended by the diligence of Nowell and 1 or 2 neighbouring magistrates, and all of them were by some means induced, some to make more liberal, and others a more restricted confession of their misdeeds in witchcraft, and were afterwards hurried away to Lancaster Castle, 50 miles off, to prison. The crimes were said to have universally proceeded from malignity and resentment, and it was reported to have repeatedly happened for poor old Demdike to be led by night from her habitation into the open air by some members of her family, where she was left alone for an hour to curse her victim and pursue her unholy incantations, and was then sought and brought back again to her hovel, her curses never failing to produce the desired effect. The poor wretches had been but a short time in prison, when information was given that a meeting of witches was held on Good Friday at Malkin's Tower, the habitation of Elizabeth Device, to the number of 20 persons, to consult how, by infernal machinations, to kill one Lovell, an officer, to blow up Lancaster Castle, deliver the prisoners, and kill another man of the name of Lister. The last object was effected. The other plans, by some means which were not related, were prevented. The prisoners were kept in jail till the summer assizes, but in the meantime the poor blind Demdike died in confinement. The other prisoners were severally indicted for killing by witchcraft certain persons who were named, and all were found guilty. The principal witnesses against Elizabeth Device were James Device and Janet Device, her grandchildren, the latter only 9 years of age. When this girl was put into the witness box, the grandmother, on seeing her, set up so dreadful a yell, intermixed with dreadful curses, that the child declared that she could not go on with her evidence unless the prisoner was removed. This was agreed to, and both brother and sister swore that they had been present when the devil came to their grandmother in the shape of a black dog, and asked her what she desired. She said the death of John Robinson, when the dog told her to make an image of Robinson in clay, and after crumble it into dust. As fast as the image perished, the life of the victim should waste away, and in conclusion the man should die. This testimony was received, and upon the conviction which followed, 10 persons were led to the gallows, and on the 20th of August, Anne Chattox, of 80 years of age, among the rest, the day after the trials, which lasted 2 days, were finished. The judges who presided on these trials were Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley, barons of the Exchequer. Guluim, who gives the most simple and interesting account of this melancholy case, conjectures, with much reason, that the old women had played at the game of commerce with the devil in order to make their simpler neighbours afraid of them, and that they played the game so long that in an imperfect degree they deceived themselves. But when one of them actually saw her grandchild of 9 years old placed in the witness box with the intention of consigning her to a public and ignominious death, then the reveries of the imagination vanished, and she deeply felt the reality that when she had been somewhat imposing on the child in devilish sport, she had been whetting the dagger that was to take her own life. It was then no wonder that she uttered her supernatural yell and poured curses from her heart. Such was the first case of the Lancashire witches. In that which follows, the accusation was clearly traced to be founded on a most villainous conspiracy. About the year 1634, a boy named Edmund Robinson, whose father, a very poor man, dwelt in Pendle Forest, the scene of the alleged witching, declared that while gathering wild flowers in one of the glades of the forest, he saw 2 greyhounds which he supposed to belong to a gentleman in the neighbourhood. Seeing nobody following them, the boy alleged that he proposed to have a course, but though a hare was started, the dogs refused to run. Young Robinson was about to punish them with a switch, when one Dame Dickinson, a neighbour's wife, started up instead of the one greyhound, and a little boy instead of the other. The witness averred that Mother Dickinson offered him money to conceal what he had seen, which he refused, saying, "Nay, thou art a witch." Apparently she was determined he should have full evidence of the truth of what he said, for she pulled out of her pocket a bridle and shot it over the head of the boy, who had so lately represented the other greyhound. He was then directly changed into a horse. Mother Dickinson mounted and took Robinson before her. They made to a large house or barn, called Ours Town, into which the boy entered with the others. He there saw 6 or 7 persons pulling at halters, from which, as they pulled them, meat ready dressed came flying in quantities, together with lumps of butter, porringers of milk, and whatever else might, in his fancy, complete a rustic feast. He declared that, while engaged in the charm, they made such ugly faces and looked so fiendish that he was frightened. This story succeeded so well that the father of the boy took him round to the neighbouring churches, where he placed him standing on a bench after service, and bade him look round and see what he could observe. The device, however clumsy, succeeded, and no less than 17 persons were apprehended at the boy's election, and conducted as witches to Lancaster Castle. These 17 persons were tried at the assizes and found guilty, but the judge, whose name has unfortunately been lost, unlike Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley, saw something in the case that excited his suspicion; and though the juries had not hesitated in any one instant, respited the convicts and sent up a report of the affair to the government. 22 years had not elapsed since the former case in vain. 4 of the prisoners were, by the judge's recommendation, sent for to the metropolis, and were examined, first by the king's physician, and then by Charles I. in person. The boy's story was strictly scrutinised, and in the end he confessed that it was all an imposture, in which he had been instructed by his father, and the whole 17 prisoners received the royal pardon. So late as the year 1679, several unfortunate persons were tried and executed at Barrow-Stowness in Scotland for witchcraft, 4 of them being poor widows. The following is a literal copy of the indictment upon which they were arraigned. Annaple Thumbstone, widow of Barrow-Stowness, Margaret Pringle, relict of the deceased John Campbell, Sievewright there, etc., etc. A and ilk ane of you are indicted and accused that, whereas, notwithstanding the law of God particularly set down in the 20th chapter of Leviticus and the 18th chapter of Deuteronomy, and be the laws and acts of Parliament of this kingdom and constant practice thereof, particularly to the 27th Act, 29 Parliament Queen Mary, the crime of witchcraft is declared to be one horrid, abominable, and capital crime, punishable with the pains of death and confiscation of movables. Nevertheless, it is of verity that you have committed and are guilty of the said crime of witchcraft, in a war far ye have entered in practition with the devil, the enemy of your salvation, and have renounced our blessed Lord and Saviour, and your baptism, and have given yourselves, both souls and bodies, to the devil, and sundry with witches in divers places. And particularly ye, the said Annaple Thompson, had a meeting with the devil the time of your widowhood, before you were married to your last husband, in your coming betwixt Linlithgow and Barrow-Stowness, where the devil, in the likeness of one black man, told you that you was one poor puddled body, and had one life and difficulties to win through the world, and promised if ye would follow him and go alongst with him, you should never want but have one better life. And about 5 weeks thereafter the devil appeared to you, when you was going to the Coal Hill about 7 o'clock in the morning. Having renewed his former temptation, you did condescend thereto, and declared yourself content to follow him and become his servant, whereupon the devil and ye, and each person of you, was at several meeting with the devil in the links of Barrow-Stowness, and in the house of you, Bessie Vicar, and ye did eat and drink with the devil, and with one another, and with witches, in her house in the night time. And the said William Crowe brought the ale which he drank, extending about 7 gallons, from the house of Elizabeth Hamilton. And you, the said Annaple, had another meeting about 5 weeks ago, when you was going to the Coal Hill of Grange, and he invited you to go alongst and drink with him in the Grange Farms, and you, the said Margaret Pringle, have been one which this many years bygone hath renounced your baptism and become the devil's servant, and promised to follow him, and the devil took you by the right hand, whereby it was for 8 days grievously pained, but having twitched new again, it immediately became hale, and you, the said Margaret Hamilton, has been the devil's servant these 8 or 9 years bygone, and he appeared and conversed with you at the town well of Barrow-Stowness, and several times at your own house, and drank several choppins of ale with you, and the devil gain you any fine mark piece of gold, which a little after became our Sklyty stone, and you, the said Margaret Hamilton, relict of James Pullivart, has been any witch, and the devil's servant 30 years since hath renounced your baptism, as said is, and ye and ilk of you was at a meeting with the devil and other witches at the cross of Muristane above Renial, upon the 13th of October last, where you all danced, and the devil acted the piper, and where you endeavoured to have destroyed Andrew Mitchell, son to John Mitchell, elder in Dean of Kenil. The charges thus made against the poor puddled bodies, Annapley Thompson and her associates, however ludicrous they may seem, were substantiated to the satisfaction of a jury; and for so meeting and dancing and drinking and frolicking with his satanic majesty, who condescended to act the piper, the unfortunate defendants were solemnly condemned to be taken to the West End of Boroughstoness, the ordinary place of execution there, upon Tuesday the 23rd day of December current, betwixt 2 and 4 in the afternoon, and then to be wirried at a stake, that is, like a bull or a badger, by dogs in human shape, till they be dead, and thereafter to have their bodies burned to ashes. The strange and eventful history of the witches of New England is perhaps generally known to the educated and informed. Still there must be many who are not aware of all its melancholy details. As a story of witchcraft without any poetry in it, without anything to amuse the imagination or interest the fancy, it perhaps surpasses everything upon record. The prosecutions for witchcraft in New England were numerous, and they continued with little intermission, principally at Salem during the greater part of the year 1692. The accusations were of the most vulgar and contemptible sort: invisible pinchings and blows, fits with the blastings and mortality of cattle, and wains stuck fast in the ground or losing their wheels. A conspicuous feature in nearly the whole of these stories was what they named the spectral sight, or in other words, that the profligate accusers first feigned, for the most part, the injuries that they received, and next saw the figures and actions of the persons who inflicted them, when they were invisible to every one else. Hence the miserable prosecutors gained the power of gratifying the wantonness of their malice, by pretending that they suffered by the hand of any one against whom they had an ill will. The persons so charged, though unseen by any one but the accuser, and who in their corporal presence were at a distance of miles, and were doubtless wholly unconscious of the mischief that was hatching against them, were immediately taken up and cast into prison; and what was more monstrous and incredible, there stood the prisoner on trial for his life, while the witnesses were permitted to swear that his spectre had haunted them and afflicted them with all manner of injuries. The first specimen of this sort of accusation was given by one Paris, a minister of a church at Salem, in the end of the year 1691, who had 2 daughters, one 9 years old, the other 11, who were afflicted with fits and convulsions. The first person fixed on as the mysterious author of these evils was Tituba, a female slave in the family, and she was harassed by her master into a confession of unlawful practices and spells. The girls then fixed on Sarah Good, a female, known to be the victim of a morbid melancholy, and Osborne, a poor man, who had for a considerable time been bedridden, as persons whose spectres had perpetually haunted and tormented them, and Good was 12 months afterwards hanged on this accusation. A person who was one of the first to fall under the imputation was one George Burroughs, also a minister of Salem. He had, it seems, buried 2 wives, both of whom the busy gossips said he had used ill in their lifetime, and consequently it was whispered he had murdered them. He was accustomed foolishly to vaunt that he knew what people said of him in his absence, and this was brought as a proof that he dealt with the devil. 2 women who were witnesses against him interrupted their testimony with exclaiming that they saw the ghosts of the murdered wives present, who had promised that they would come, though no one else in the court saw them, and this was taken in evidence. Burroughs conducted himself in a very injudicious way on his trial, but when he came to be hanged, made so impressive a speech on the ladder, with fervent protestations of innocence, as melted many of the spectators into tears. End of Part 66.